Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. The current energy crisis that have started after the recovery of pandemic last year and worsened with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine early this year rose to record level the gas prices in Europe and Asia. Global demand for the fuel is soaring in European nations, race to win themselves off Russian gas supplies in the wake of Moscow attack on Ukraine. West Texas Intermediate traded near 120 per barrel. Saudi Arabia boosted its official selling prices for Russian customers in July as China cautiously emerges from virus lockdowns that have strained its economy. Benchmark Brent crude is trading above 120 a barrel, about 70% higher than a year ago, while European gas prices have tripled in the period as the war in Ukraine stokes supply concerns. The war has funded inflation, driving up the cost of food to fuels and prompted aggressive monetary tightening from central banks. The SDG7 goals for by 2030 to achieve a universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy is not still in track to achieve. The EU latest package of measures, Repower EU plan, aims strengthening energy security by increasing renewable energy sources, energy efficiency, hydrogen production, and nuclear, while at the same time works to reduce the high dependency from Russian oil and gas. By increasing, of course, the imports from other countries, that means that we leave the one dependency and we go to another. Of course, decarbonization is the biggest challenge facing our generation, and the industry going to profound change, but the energy transition will not happen overnight. Moving too fast to an extreme position would face a huge cost. It is obvious that we live in a hydrocarbon world, and will do so for the near future. The world continues to need oil and gas for decades to come because some sectors of the economy are hard to electrify. So, oil and gas exploration and production, as well as the importance of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, has a key role. But the current energy prices caused a deep shift in energy policy. We know that we learn late. UK begins a pivot from renewables with focus to domestic oil and gas investments. A government that was focused on renewables in the turn up to last year's COP26 climate talks is now working to boost investment in oil and gas fields. Boris Johnson said that the local gas plays an essential role for the UK's energy security and the transition to net zero emission. The American Petroleum Institute, on the other hand, joined with 80 trade groups calling on Biden administration to act on policies that support US energy security and increase production of natural gas and oil for 5 years program in place. A reasonable guess is that the gas will play some sort of role in getting us from where we are to where we're going. In a future energy mix can have a key role as a reliable source of power to supplement renewable energy when wind and solar power is not available. So, I think that this crisis faces a big challenges for Greece to develop oil and gas upstream for indigenous production and to reduce our dependency from the high-price energy imports for regional and for Greece and regional for the energy security and to avoid the energy poverty. We have decided to import our gas via LNG installations, making Greece an LNG gateway with an ever-increasing price, instead of trying to use local production. This is not the right thing to do for the climate, never mind our energy security. So, we are left in a curious situation. On the one hand, the government admits we need more gas-fired power generation to ensure continued security of electricity supply. On the other hand, the government is choosing to put our energy security at risk by relying solely on reports for the gas supply necessary for that. We see a potential future for blue or green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and offshore wind. In the meantime, but in the meantime, we could be providing cheaper, more reliable, low carbon intensive gas, whatever gas can be imported across the LNG installations. There are existing exploration licenses around Greece that undoubtedly have great potential to discover hydrocarbons and a special gas. With the right regulatory support, we could continue to play a really positive role in the country and East Mediterranean region, providing the critical base load support while energy systems transition to a net zero future. We need an honest and open conversation about how we are going to meet our energy needs. The conversation needs to be grounded in facts, not driven by ideology. Here in our session, we have invited distinguished energy experts in the oil and gas upstream in order to discuss the present and the future situation of this sector. But now I would like to ask from Mr. Tartaras, who is here on behalf of Hellenic Hydrocarbon Resources and Management Company, which is the state company who is mainly responsible for the development of upstream sector in Greece for public interest. So I would like Mr. Tartaras to point it out the planning and the steps that the company is going to take in order to implement the recent Prime Minister's suggestion for the acceleration of upstream sector in Greece.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Fokianou. Thank you also very much to Mr. Stambolis for organizing an excellent event and with an extra advantage in my home city. So that's nice. So my talk will be mostly related to developing the hydrocarbon resources in Greece, of course, but I hope that it will give a stimulus also for a general discussion also in general for Southeastern Europe. So before I go to the main part of the discussion, I would like to very briefly show a little bit about the role of the Hellenic Hydrocarbon Resources Management. Although the panel is extremely well aware of that role, there might be some of you in the audience here today or watching online that might not be very aware. So HHRM is a private company with a sole shareholder, the Greek state. It was basically founded in 2011. And its main goal is basically to promote and manage the rights of the Greek state regarding the exploration, exploitation, and production of hydrocarbons. And of course, in order to do this, it makes several cooperations with research institutes, discusses with potential investors, and so forth. During the years, the role has been expanded. So in 2016, it was also designated as the Offshore Safety Authority. So basically, it is responsible for checking the safety of all offshore oil and gas installations, like platforms, for example. And more recently, it has also acquired 65% of shares of DEPA International, which basically contains various pipelines like TAP or IGB and so forth. And more recently, in order to support the country's energy transition efforts, it has taken additional roles. In April, for example, it was designated as the Licensing and Regulatory Authority for Carbon Capture and Storage, CCS, and also for storage of other potential gases and liquids underground, which could, in theory, in the future, also include hydrogen. And finally, it has been nominated as the Regulatory and Licensing Authority for offshore wind projects in the new law that will soon be submitted to the Greek Parliament. So that's a very short introduction, and we can go forward to the next part of the talk. So this slide is practically the same slide, except with a small aesthetic change, that I showed 6 months ago in a previous conference of IENA, actually, in Athens at that time. And it talks about the energy trilemma. It's something that we have been discussing for quite some time before actually the war in Ukraine broke out. And it shows that in order to move forward in our energy transition process, we need to take into account three things: not just environmental sustainability, which of course absolutely necessary, but also energy security and energy equity. Without these two pillars, the third one on its own is not really meaningful. So right now we are in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. I think it's an energy crisis that has started already before. We had seen the high gas prices in Greece, at least from, let's say, December, but of course it is exacerbated with the war in Ukraine. And what does it mean? I'm sorry, small. The problem is that essentially these two pillars, the energy security and the energy equity, are in trouble. And this poses big problems, because it means that the European Union, specifically as we talk here mostly about Europe, has its energy security at peril. And this means also that it cannot provide energy at good prices to its citizens. So, have we learned any lessons from this crisis? It is admittedly quite early, but I think we can already draw some conclusions. The first conclusion is that basically this energy crisis will not be short-lived. We believe that during this energy transition, we will have, let's say, a series of energy crises, and we need to manage them and mitigate them. The other conclusion is that basically there is little tolerance in the economy and the society for a gap in supply and demand. I mean, the effects on the economy of a large supply and demand gap are obviously very, very important. And lack of energy, of sufficient energy supply, actually poses a security threat. When countries or whole blocks like the European Union struggle, let's say, to meet their energy needs, that in itself is a big, big security threat that needs to be mitigated. And of course, every country or every block of countries, let's say every union, should try to move towards energy independence. Of course, this cannot be achieved at 100%. We understand that. We live in an interconnected world, but we should try and use all potential domestic resources in order to satisfy our energy needs. And in that effort, we strongly believe that all resources are needed. Yes, we are, during an energy transition, we are going towards a carbon-free future. We strongly believe in that. But in order to arrive there, we need to use, in a clever and efficient way, all the resources we have available. And that includes natural gas, which is the transition fuel. So, as all crises, this one also presents a window of opportunity. All crises, actually, are at the same time opportunities. So right now, what we have big geopolitical problems. We have a war going on in our neighborhood, let's say. At the same time, we have a shortage of supply and really high prices. EU is struggling with the security of its energy supplies. And of course, it has to pay a very high price in order to be able to buy the natural gas specifically or other forms of energy that it currently needs. However, for Greece, but not only, for our region, I would say, this presents an opportunity. Greece in particular is very well placed at the corridor between the East Med and Balkans, Southeastern Europe, and the rest of Europe in general. And it can take actually advantage of this situation because it has untapped natural gas resources, potentially. There are indications into that direction. There is significant local demand in Greece, but also in our neighborhood. So the Balkans in general, they are growing and they will have higher energy demands. And very, very importantly, there is a lot of infrastructure already available in Greece. A lot of it has been developed in the last few years. It is becoming more and more important, the infrastructure for either receiving imports of natural gas or transporting natural gas through the region. And of course, we should not forget, there's a very good level of cooperation in the East Med. And this actually was highlighted by the announcement of the MOU that was signed just 2 days ago between Israel, Egypt, and the European Union, which actually shows how important it is actually to have partners that can provide secure energy resources, and also highlights the importance of the potential natural gas resources within Greece. So, taking a closer look now to Greece itself, first of all, the war in Ukraine has obviously showed that there was a vulnerability in Europe's basically energy plan. 40% was the dependence on Russian gas, and if we look at Southeastern Europe in particular, this percentage was even higher, was at 77%. At the same time, there is a very large demand expected in Greece. 16 billion cubic meters is the forecasted need by 2040, and around 11 billion in the rest of Southeastern Europe. Now, for Greece, this presents, as I said, opportunities in two ways. One is because of the infrastructure. As you see on this map, we have highlighted various existing or under planning gas transportation infrastructure, either domestic, of course there's a domestic network, but there are also international pipelines. We have TAP that crosses northern Greece and goes through Albania to Italy. There's IGB that has been recently completed, and there are others in planning. Of course, East Med, which is a big project that could connect East Med to the rest of Europe through Greece, but also Greece could also tap in its own potential natural gas resources. And talking about this, we can see this picture, which the ones that are from geoscience here are very familiar with, but it's also very striking. So we have the Greek, let's say, basins, the Ionian and Crete basin in this case, which are lying really in the middle of other prolific basins in Central and East Med. We have the Adriatic to the northwest, we have Sirte Basin in Libya, we have Herodotus Basin and Nile Basin and Levantine Basin in the East Med, and so forth. So all of these basins are quite prolific. There's a lot of production from there. And the one that I would say is underexplored is the Greek basin. So there is a thick sedimentary infill. There are proven hydrocarbon systems. Unfortunately, the seismic coverage, which is necessary in order to get better idea of what really exists there, is quite sparse. We have the large 2D multi-client survey in 2012 from PGS that was commissioned by the Greek state, basically. And since then, we have very few surveys, for example, like in 2016, the 3D survey by LP and so forth. There are very few wells as well. There are 3 wildcats with oil and gas shows, and then there are some more wells further near shore that are maybe not as interesting. And there is 1 gas and oil discovery in the Katakolo field. So there's a lot of potential there, but we need to explore it more. However, we're, I think, on a good path. And one very good example of this is actually that this year, after we had the first offshore seismic surveys since 2016 that were completed successfully by LP, one of our investors in the blocks in Greece. And what is very satisfactory also is that they were actually completed with the highest environmental and safety standards, and we're very happy for this. So these 2 surveys were completed in 2 blocks in the Ionian Sea. One is Block 10 and the other one is the Ionian block. And it's very, very important that we think a new environmental standard was set, a standard that I think sets the bar high for the region in general, and it's something that we want to see continued in all future seismic surveys for hydrocarbons in Greece. I will not go through the whole list, but there were several measures to protect, especially the sea mammals that is of particular interest in the Greek trough. For example, the soft start protocol, you gradually start shooting your seismic surveys to have the mammals go away. We have the doubling of the marine mammal observers on the vessel. We have the doubling of the safety zone around the vessel, and so forth. A lot of measures, passive acoustic monitoring as well, before, during, and after the survey. So these are all very, very good measures, and we think it is important because we believe that we can do both exploration for natural gas and at the same time protect the environment. Also, it is very, very important that we actually can say with clarity that we are now accelerating the effort to basically explore for Greece's natural gas resources. We have the clear and full support of the government from the Prime Minister himself, who actually declared these projects of national importance. There is a task force that has been actually created by the Ministry of Energy and Environment, whose basically job is to oversee swift progress in all these projects, avoiding any type of delays. We will make sure that there are no delays in permitting, and of course, Greece has been already and will continue to be quite friendly in investors, and we are open for anyone interested in this domain. So, as most of you know, we currently have 8 active concessions. 2 of them are in exploitation and production stage. Of course, Prinos close to Kavala and Thassos has been producing for the last 40 years. The other 6 are actually in exploration stage. 5 of them are offshore in the Ionian Sea and also west and southwest of Crete. And one of them is onshore in the Ioannina area, which is actually the most mature and where the first exploratory well is planned for next year by Energean. And of course, there are some estimates that can vary widely about the potential, obviously, value of these deposits. A conservative number, 250 billion, with the current gas prices, of course, it can be even much larger and so forth. There's no need to go into that. So this is a very schematic roadmap of what will happen in the next years. So by the end of 2023, we want to see the completion of all the seismic surveys in the current phases of the blocks. Then within 3 to 4 years from now, we will have the completion of all the exploratory drillings in the blocks. And within 6 to 7 years, basically, we will have production from the potential Greek natural gas deposits. So before the end of the decade, which is actually the stated goal also of the government, as was stated again in Cairo by the minister, Mr. Skrekas, that we want to be a producer of natural gas within the decade. I have to say that this is an ambitious program. We recognize that, but we think it's also realistic. Let's call it an ambitiously realistic program. And we are strongly committed at HHRM to help our investors and make everything possible in order to actually have this materialize. And finishing, in order to also give maybe some food for thought and further discussion, is that we don't see hydrocarbons and natural gas standing on their own. It's not our end goal. It's another resource that we have, that we need to use it in order to have a just energy transition. And we are committed basically to help the energy transition, the effort in the country, based on 4 pillars. The first one is what we talked now about, is the natural gas, which is important, is the transition fuel. We need it, as I said, in order to have a just energy transition. The second one is the carbon capture and storage, which is very, very important for various reasons, because it's the only technology that actually can have a negative effect on the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We can actually use it to produce blue hydrogen, which is the cheapest currently way to produce hydrogen from natural gas. And at the same time, it's clean because you keep and you store the CO2. And of course, it is extremely important for the Greek industry. Otherwise, soon, due to the taxes on CO2, Greek industry would have to theoretically go and look elsewhere for transporting their CO2 emissions, which is not ideal. The third pillar is, of course, offshore wind, which seems to be the faster developing renewable energy form, and it is very, very important that Greece moves fast and becomes a leader in that domain. Already, I think Greece is doing very well. We are 8th in the world in the production of electricity from renewables, and we will continue. There are very ambitious targets set from the government. And of course, the last one, a little bit, let's say, further down the line, is hydrogen, which is also, however, very important even for natural gas investments, because as we heard yesterday from several panelists, it is very, very important in order to attract these investments that there is a long-term horizon. Nobody will come and put a lot of money. No bank will give a big loan for something that is for 5-10 years. So you need to have investments in infrastructure, and this infrastructure needs to be suitable both for natural gas transportation and for hydrogen or a mixed, let's say, gas type of transportation. So that's all I wanted to say, just to stimulate the discussion, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion with the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tartaras, for your presentation. It looks to be optimistic, and we are very pleased because we hear that you have very good plans for the future. But, you know, we need actions. We need acceleration. We need facts, because we have delay for many years in this section. You know that.
I agree. So the point is what we can do. There's no point, I think, is in dwelling on the past. The thing is what we can do now,
exactly.
Together, of course, with our investors. In the end, it is the oil and gas companies who will make this work. We are there in order to help them and make the best we can to facilitate their work. Of course, always respecting the law and all the environmental
And you have to convince the government, any government, I don't mean for now, that this sector is very, very important for our economy.
I think we have a clear and full support. I think that is very, very clear. Without going into comparison with other countries, I don't think, let's say, in the rest of Europe or Southern Europe, there is any stronger support for the sector.
So I wish in the next energy dialogue to have more results and to hear something to be successful. Okay, so I want to ask Mr. Yannis Grigoriou. Mr. Yannis Grigoriou is a mining engineer and geophysicist with over 40 years experience in oil and gas industry, despite his looking younger.
Thank you so much.
The last 10 years, he was appointed and CEO of Hellenic Petroleum in the upstream sector. And from his side, he was on behalf of Hellenic Petroleum, operator and partner in international joint ventures with Total, ExxonMobil, Repsol, Edison, and Energean. Now he's vice president in the Central Europe Energy Group, and was elected from 76 oil companies, acting in an area while he's also in ENA partner. Mr. Grigoriou, we know that the last 2-3 years, the European Union is totally against fossil fuels. Recently, we are experiencing an energy crisis while EU countries are dependent on imports of fossil fuels, especially gas. The Russian invasion in Ukraine and the subsequent EU constraints in hydrocarbon imports from Russia skyrocketed the oil and gas prices. Also, the Greece's Prime Minister recently stated Because of the war in Ukraine, the country must explore its indigenous resources. Therefore, the exploration activity of natural gas in the country is a major importance. He also asked from the Hellenic Hydrocarbon Resources and Management to speed up exploration works by the end of 2023. I would like to ask you, what is your opinion about this? And how do you think that we can way out?
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words, and many thanks to Ian, and especially Kostis. It's not enough to say thank you for this extraordinary event, which provide arguments to the industry and the decision makers to follow a better policy. And I'm saying that because we've seen that the policy and the strategy, especially of European Union, is a flat failure. The last years we are experiencing a strategy which is failure. It failed. And which is the reason behind that? First of all, okay, we are listening for climate change, climate crisis. I'm not going to touch this big topic, just to tell you that the planet has evidenced 11 times so far climate change, and the planet survived. So what is in question is not the planet itself, but our civilization. The planet will continue to be here even after this climate change. This is geologically speaking. So our civilization is under question mark, and our civilization is based on energy. But may I have a photo, please? See, this is a cartoon which is published back 160 years ago, Pennsylvania, US, and this is a cartoon with whales drinking because they were saved. And they saved because the people discovered oil. Till then, in the US and around the world, they were fishing the whales to get up the fat for energy. So the whales, contrary to what WWF is saying, were saved because of oil. At that time, the oil industry came up, the first refinery was established in the US, and see the next one. Some 30 years later, the second, please. The second year later in London, it was 1894, it was a forecast that in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of horse manure, which didn't happen because 10 years later, about 20,000 of cars were in London. But it took 40 years from oil discovery to civilization to absorb the oil industry, to start having cars. And remember, in Greece, the last villages were electrified by 1960, 100 years later. So it takes time to pass from one energy source to another. And the EU would like to do that in a couple of years. And, okay, with a forecast for decades, but the last 2 years we've seen everything. And this, what that? Energy mix to be changed, energy crisis, which has nothing to do with the war, it was before that. Now the war is energy nightmare, and then the next step is what Nikos and Kostas told before, poverty, energy poverty, which means that all of us, we are doing the wrong thing. There is a way out. Renewables, perfect, we are with them. Hydrogen, yes, but the technology is not there. Energy storage, finally, we are with them, but it's not there. So what we have to do now is still hydrocarbons for the next 30, 50 years from now. Remember, it was 98 with the oil peak theory that the oil would not exist by 2000. It continues, and there is no oil peak yet. So what I mean is that we have to be rather conservative on how we foresee the future in energy transition. Hydrocarbons is a way, not the best, but it is. And in Greece, we are far behind. All of us, we are working in this dirty industry for years and years. You, Teresa, were one of those who tried to do that which was 25 years ago. It stopped. We are trying again now with Yannis, with Hellenic. We did that because we've seen, we have data, seismic data, that are unbelievable nice. We have seismic data for Crete, which are, you can see geological structures, which are copy and paste of Zohr. And you know Zohr is the discovery that happened in Egypt.
But John, I want to tell you something about this, because you have a great experience. Why all these significant delays in exploration and production for works in Greeks from the operators? Why they sometimes ask for extension in their program, other times they relinquish the blocks, or even worse, sometimes they are leaving. What is your opinion? Because you are the most expert, I think, to say that.
I think that the answer is unique. There is no political support, because it's not that the Prime Minister told 2 months ago that he is supporting hydrocarbons exploration. It's too late. The ministers before that, 2 or 3 ministers, have stated the other thing. The Greek operators had a lot of delays. Some of them were justified. Do you know that for Crete, WWF has appealed to the High Court of Greece, and that the hearing has been postponed 4 times so far, and the hearing now has been arranged for mid-October 2022, when at that time the first exploration period is ending, and how these guys will spend money for seismic survey without having the environmental studies being approved. It's impossible. That's why Total say it's enough. That's why Repsol says, I have spent 40 million in the Ioannina area. I have spotted 3 locations to be drilled, and when they asked some support, they didn't get that. So this is the reality. There is no consistency, and there is no continuation from all the political parties and from some of the operators. So
we know that, John, for this reason, we want to hear from an official person, because you were in the joint ventures with all these companies that I said before, so you know exactly what happened.
Without like to spend more time, because I think that I spoke a lot, I would like to say something and stop it. Is that, and perhaps there is an answer by HHRM, or I don't know from whom. The Prime Minister asked to speed up the exploration effort and to have some results in a couple of years. To the best of my knowledge, there were 2 licensed areas, which were ready to go ahead for drilling.
No.
The one area is Patraikos. We have sought 3D survey according to all these environmental standards, completed successfully in 2016. There is a very nice geological structure. To my view, having worked in the past in Greece, is the best structure we have ever drilled so far. It's not the best for the future, but it absolutely is the best ever drilled so far in Greece. The recoverable reserves, there are about 140 million barrels of oil, more than Prinos, and the upper part is gas cap. So it was ready to be drilled. No. It's not drilled so far. The other project is the nearby onshore area in northwest Peloponnese. In northwest Peloponnese, back in 80s, drilling wells there as the public company, we have passed through biogen methane. At the time, back in 80s, it was not of interest, so we didn't test it. But biogen natural gas is there. So we've seen that, and to my view, and I think I'm not optimist, I am realistic, because of the depth of the wells, is a project that in 2 years, in a couple of years, could be efficient to be done, and so the natural gas from there could be linked by pipeline to megalopolis, stopped power plants, to give some essence in the agricultural area around, and also to go to Patras. So all this part of Western Greece, in 2 years from now, could have natural gas, and then if the well in Patraikos is successful, could have more gas for the rest of Western Greece. And these two areas are relinquished back to the Greek state. I don't know why, and I'm wondering why HHRM will not give them back as open door procedure, so somebody else to come. If the operator didn't
you know why, John. But okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
You do
so,
know, but
so
we don't know. You do know, but we don't know.
I'm not authorized to say any more on that.
I will come to you later, because I would like to invite in online Mr. George Kovacic. Is he online? Oh, hello. Hello.
Hello.
Very nice to see you, and you are with us in our panel. Mr. John Kovacic is an upstream oil and gas expert in energy, is advisor to corporation in the oil and gas industry. Between them, I want to point out that George also advises hydrocarbon agencies and ministries, playing a leading role in the launching of hydrocarbon license rounds and the establishment of successful regulatory and fiscal regimes for hydrocarbon exploration and production. According to your international experience, Mr. Kovacic, I would like to ask you, are the international oil companies interested to invest in offshore in Southeast Europe for exploration and production? And you know that when I say Southeast Europe, I mean I focus in Greece, because we know that all the area in the southeast, they are very active in exploration and production. I mean, Egypt, Israel, and now Cyprus. What can do authorities to encourage IOC's investment?
Okay, so there's a lot of questions there, but first of all, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel. And I want to say good afternoon to my panelists and to all of you, and good morning to everybody else that is watching from North America and everywhere else. I have to say, I'm very, very optimistic listening to this session and actually listening to the previous session as well, because for the first time, I'm hearing the key words that I didn't hear for many, many, many years, actually probably since about 2016. And that is energy poverty, energy security, and developing your own resources. To answer your questions, there are a lot of hydrocarbon resources in Southeast Europe, particularly in the offshore. And we heard that from the other panelists just now. We know from a seismic that's been acquired, recently and in the recent past, that there are huge potential. There's been analysis done, there's been interpretations done, and I'm confident, and so are other industry experts, there's going to be a lot of discoveries in Greece and up into the Adriatic. as well. So yeah, absolutely, there are oil and gas companies that are interested in returning to the area and coming for the first time to the area, and both super majors, majors, nationals, and NOCs. We can take a look at what's happening currently, for example, in Romania. They had some issues. They changed their fiscal regimes. They did a bait and switch, which didn't prove popular. But they've learned, and they're moving forward, and there's going to be massive discoveries there and new discoveries. We know from a recent report from Deloitte that they're predicting, from prices from back in 2018, revenues for the government in the €7 billion range annually, plus tens of thousands of jobs. So to answer your question, your first question, yes, indeed, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of interest for companies coming in. Why? Because the resources exist, the demand exists. The governments are changing their tune right now for investment. They know the only way you can do an effective transition is to get rid of energy poverty and to ensure energy security. And that can be done by producing hydrocarbons, both oil and gas, by utilizing carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And carbon capture, utilization, and storage was actually developed in our oil and gas industry. Most carbon that is captured today in the world, about 60-70%, is done in the oil and gas industry. So the second part of your question is really key. What can be done to encourage oil and gas companies back to the region or to the region for the first time? That's very important. And I'm going to divide that into two sectors. One is above ground, one is below ground. Oil and gas companies, or actually any company, they're looking to reduce risk. For below ground risk, what you can do, and this was mentioned, by a couple of the speakers just now, is acquire more seismic. It's very important. There is a lot of seismic in the area already. It's been a number of years. A lot of it is 2D. I know TGS has a great 2D seismic in the Adriatic, but it's important to move forward and acquire new 3D seismic. And that'll reduce the below ground risk for the IOCs that are looking at the area. It'll give everybody an opportunity to interpret the data, understand, and the more geologists and geoscientists that are involved, the better information we'll get. And the second item is to reduce the above ground risk. And this is really key. And this was mentioned by a couple of people already, just in a bit different words. But we need to have, from Greece, from Croatia, from Albania, from Montenegro, and from everybody else, clear messaging that as a part of the energy transition, we also need oil and gas. It is better to produce that oil and gas in Southeast Europe than import it from elsewhere. It is better to produce that oil and gas in Southeast Europe than use coal or have people using tires, as we heard in the previous sessions, for heat. I can give a different example. I know in Bosnia-Herzegovina, people are mining their own coal because they can't afford other options. So it's better to have that oil and gas. It's better to produce that oil and gas and stimulate carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So we need clear messaging from the leaders, the prime ministers, the presidents of all these countries that yes, we're going towards energy transition, but it's going to take a while. And the only way we're going to achieve energy transition is to ensure that energy poverty does not skyrocket and ensure that we have energy. And that means clear messaging, but promptly delivering permits. And as was just mentioned, if there are lawsuits, addressing them properly and doing it quickly, because IOCs are not going to wait for months or years or quarters to hear decisions. You need to support the oil and gas companies moving forward. And by doing that, you're supporting yourself, your citizens, and ultimately helping the energy transition. We don't want to do what Germany is doing, for example, in going into coal, tearing down ancient villages and churches and stuff like that. We don't need to be that in Southeast Europe. Southeast Europe, for now, can finally be a leader. And instead of being, as somebody else mentioned, the tail on the dog, it can be the leader and do both, produce hydrocarbons and head towards energy transition in a smart way. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you very much, because Mr. Kovacic, and I think this is very interesting also to take account Hellenic hydrocarbon resource and management, who we have here, Mr. Tartaras, and I think it's a very good information. Except that I'd like to ask, do you think that exploration and production of hydrocarbons and energy transition is both possible, or is if we can delay the transition if we accelerate the exploration and production of hydrocarbons?
Great question. Absolutely, we can both produce oil and gas, and I'm going to stress oil and gas, not just natural gas, and transition. How do we do it? We do it by using carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And this is key. Southeast Europe, and let's not kid ourselves, Southeast Europeans are substantially poorer than the rest of Europeans. And you can see this. You can see it not only by people using coal, they mine by themselves, old tires, and often wood, which is very polluting, to heat themselves. And actually, I'm going to touch on that wood basis because there is some countries in the region, for example, Croatia and Bosnia, that use a huge percentage of wood. And by using this wood, we're getting rid of carbon sinks. We're leading to deforestation. We're leading to pollution of waterways and water resources. It's actually a disaster because by using oil and gas, we've allowed those forests to come back the past 40 years. I remember when I was a kid going through the dinner eats, there were barren of trees. But because of oil and gas, forests have grown up over the past 20 years. It is phenomenal. So back to your question. Indeed, we can both produce oil and gas and go towards the energy transition. There is, for example, depleted natural gas fields in the Northern Adriatic, both on the Italian side and on the Croatian side. I know there's studies being done by both states, and I'm confident there's going to be an opportunity to actually use carbon flooding, stimulate additional production, and store that carbon. So this is an area where the European Union should be helping Southeast Europeans, give them the funding so they can prod out additional hydrocarbons, and at the same time, reduce energy poverty and help the energy transition. So we don't have to, like I said before, like Germany, tear down ancient villages and forests to mine coal. Southeast Europe has the hydrocarbon resources. We need leadership from our leaders to do both. So they're not mutually exclusive, they're mutually inclusive. We can do both. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. It was a great answer to a great question, as you said. Please stay with us, Mr. Kovacic. And I want now to ask Mr. Nikodimos from Cyprus Hydrocarbon. Oh, hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Nice to have you in our panel. We are... oh, something happened?
No, he's sharing the small few slides.
Okay.
Is something wrong?
No, it's okay. I cannot see you. Oh, it's okay. Mr. Nikodimou, Cyprus make us to feel optimistic about upstream activity in your area, and we hope for a great discovery that could trigger for awareness and the neighbor country, I mean Greece. investors continue to stay and accomplish the contractual obligation, despite the inconvenience of and discourage of Turkey. I mean, it is a good example to follow. So, can you say we follow your activity, and we see that maybe something we are waiting for a big discovery, especially in the Block 6. We don't know what happened because I think it's too early to know about this. Can you say, how do you estimate the future of Southeast Mediterranean in strengthen for discoveries and strengthening the energy security in Europe?
No, absolutely, I can. First of all, thanks for the introduction, Ms. Fogianou, and I'd also like to thank Iene and Mr. Stambolis for the invitation to speak here today. Maybe it would be nice if I could put some of my slides on screen to kind of talk through this. So, to answer the question at a very high level, I think what's important for the East Med and the East Med discoveries is to make sure that we're in a road path that we can sustainably monetize them. So not just develop, but monetize as well. Because finding the gas is one thing, but actually making it commercial and getting it to market is another. And what I mean by sustainability, or what we understand sustainability to be here at CHC, is both the environmental aspects of it, but also the commercial aspects of it, because you need to be able to create a framework in which companies are able to invest long term in these projects with a sense of certainty and avoid surprises. So it needs to be sustainable from a commercial point of view as well. Now, to answer one of your questions, I want to talk a little bit about, give a little bit of a snapshot as to what's happening in Cyprus at the moment. We're a little bit ahead of the curve compared to Greece, but we're not yet at the stage that we're producing from our discoveries. We've licensed 10 blocks in Cyprus to a number of companies. I won't go through the details of each block, but you can see some very recognizable names on the map there. We have 3 discoveries, Aphrodite, Glaukos, and Calypso, and we're moving forward towards figuring out how to develop those resources. To this year, 2022, has been very exciting for Cyprus after a little bit of a hiatus in activity during COVID. We've had the completion of the Glaukos appraisal well earlier this year by ExxonMobil and Qatar Petroleum in Block 10, which was a successful appraisal with high-quality hydrocarbons being encountered in the appraisal well. And now we're working together with the operator to understand better exactly what that means for the field in terms of monetizable resources. We have the discovery we have an exploration well being carried out by ENI in Kronos in Block 6, like you mentioned. That well is still ongoing. We won't have results from that until later on this summer. But that's a first part of a 2-well commitment by ENI in 2022 as well. So as soon as they finish with that well, depending on the results, they will then go to a second target in the EEZ. And finally, also we have some very detailed 3D seismic being planned from Block 5, which was awarded to Exxon and Qatar Petroleum last year. So this is the busiest year in terms of activity in Cyprus since we announced our first licensing round back in 2008, and it's linked to coming out of COVID. It's linked to energy markets, and particular gas markets, having a much more positive medium to short-term outlook as a minimum. And obviously, in terms of energy security for Southeast Europe, Europe in general, Cyprus is one of the few EU countries with significant undeveloped, i.e. discovered resources that are not producing yet, and undiscovered gas reserves. And we feel that Cyprus can contribute significantly to not just repower EU, but to the energy security for the region longer term as well. But like I said, we have to make the Eastmed gas more competitive. So what's the first step? I would say focus on LNG. And why I would say focus on LNG? Well, Cyprus is a very small market, and we cannot support from our domestic demand a large project in deep water like would be needed. Now, I think I'm going to be preaching to the converted on the panel here around the transition, but I want to talk a little bit about this chart. So this has been generated by our friends at Gas Strategies, and what it indicates is historical LNG consumption and LNG demand forecast going forward. And there's various scenarios. The blue line is one in which all commitments by developed and kind of large developing nations in terms of decarbonization come to pass. And the other lines are, if you like, slightly more pessimistic on the pace and scope of the energy transition. And what you will notice is that the more aggressive the energy transition forecast is, the higher the demand for LNG growth. And this is something that's underlined by forecasts by the likes of BP, by Shell, by Exxon, and by organizations like the IEA as well. And there's plenty of space for LNG to grow as well. Because if you look at the global LNG outlook by IHS Markit and where we are at the moment in terms of existing plants and plants that are under construction, there's a lot of space there to invest. So I guess the step one, focus on LNG because it's a little bit insensitive to a degree to demands of the energy transition. I would say then the second step is to look for economies of scale and synergies. So it's similar to what will likely be the case in Greece. Gas fields that we're looking for are isolated, and sometimes the biggest challenge is to actually transport it to market. Now, there's several ways to go about this. There's already a lot of infrastructure in the region, particularly in Egypt, and there's ways, if we can share the infrastructure and kind of understand how we can utilize what's already there, that helps a lot compared to doing everything from scratch. And this is something that applies to the wider region as well. When we talk about the East Med, another thing that sometimes makes things more complicated on the scene is that you hear about, Lebanon's ambitions, Israel's ambitions, the gas industry in Egypt, discoveries in Cyprus, and you hear even what's going on Gaza Marine in Palestine. And you hear 4 or 5 different countries and you think that it's all very complicated. But if you took away the international borders and zoomed in as where the large gas discoveries have happened over the past 10, 15 years, they're all very, very close together. So kind of the basin in which all these discoveries are, it's geology doesn't understand international boundaries. So looking at opportunities to develop across borders is actually something that can help as well. And kind of underpinning that is being able to have some common policy and common strategy. And this is where forums like the EMGF, the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, which had its 7th ministerial meeting this week, is very important, because these are the forums where countries can kind of work together and understand the development of the gas market as a region. And of course, countries when we talk about Southeast Europe, that involves Greece as well, and Italy, which is part of the EMGF. And below the EMGF, there's a gas industry advisory body, of which CHC is chairing this year. and we are very much focused on developing a better understanding of the demands and requirements of each of not only the governments involved, but the companies operating in the emerging countries on both a commercial level, in terms of how they see regional markets emerging, how they see things progressing in terms of the supply-demand balance for the region and what's available for exports. In terms of a regulatory framework, so it's easier for companies to work cross-border, and there's a common language and a common understanding when it comes to how you develop projects from a regulatory point of view, cross-border. And finally, from a technical point of view, so understanding what the availability of these existing infrastructures are, how can they be utilized, what technologies are of the most interest to unlock the regional gas and get it to market easy. So, and there's a lot of appetite for regional cooperation, so I think it's important to take advantage of it and make it into something tangible. And finally, we need to obviously incorporate decarbonization trends offshore. So this can happen at various scales. Other speakers on the panel have talked about regional carbon capture and storage. Prinos is a depleted gas field in Greece, and obviously as a depleted gas field, it's a prime candidate for CO2 storage. In Egypt, we have lots of depleted gas fields in the Nile Delta, which are now depleted and no longer operating. And CCUS is something that really will benefit from having large scale to it, as it's an additional cost at the moment to the normal way of doing business in the hydrocarbons in the upstream sector. So something we need to look at. And I think going maybe smaller scale, utilizing offshore grids and interconnectivity between countries, and the increased penetration of renewables into the domestic electricity grids of the countries of the East Med, and utilizing that to power our facilities offshore. And then finally, at a smaller scale, you can look at integrating, subsea developments with floating renewables as well. And in general, there's a lot of options, and not one of these is the right answer. And depending on the scale and the maturity of this is kind of what we feel is what's the developments of the future in terms of monetizing gas will look like going forward. Also, that as a kind of come back to your question, I think that natural gas and LNG in particular has a key role to play in the energy transition, and is something that's demand for which will be strong, and it will help maintain interest in exploration activities in the Eastern Med for a long time to come. But in order to make sure that it's attractive and to be able to compete in the global market, even once the price spike that we have at the moment passes, we need to cooperate regionally and make sure that sustainability is the cornerstone of how we assess our developments. And Cyprus, not having started production rate, and Greece as well, have the opportunity to get it right first time. So that's about it. I hope that I've kind of answered your questions there as much as I could.
Thank you very much for your so nice and clear presentation, Mr. Nicodemou. But I want to ask you a question that I think that we all want to know about this. According to your experience, do you think that we lose the opportunity of the construction of East Med pipeline because we delay to succeed the cooperation, a regional cooperation, and to make a joint development?
No, I don't think that would be a missed opportunity. The East Med gas pipeline is one of the options for monetizing gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. But I would kind of almost flip the question, if you like. The EastMed gas pipeline, by its very nature, needs regional cooperation for it to go ahead. It's a cross-border pipeline going through the Z of several countries, and it will, if it's going to come to fruition, it will need both gas producers from several countries to be able to fill a pipeline of that scale. So we're not just talking about Cypriot gas necessarily, but we're also talking about potentially Israeli gas supplementing those into the pipeline. And Egypt has also expressed an interest in how they might utilize it. And you also need to have gas buyers on the other end of the pipeline in order to kind of underpin its commercial viability as well. So you're going to have gas buyers as a minimum in Greece, also for the Cyprus domestic market probably, and further afield in Italy and other European countries as well. So I would say that having the regional cooperation and looking at opportunities to work together is actually what's going to help make that project a commercial reality.
I ask this because recently the European Commission has proposed a deal to EU member states with Egypt and Israel to boost imports from natural gas from the Eastern Mediterranean, according to a draft document. The draft memorandum of understanding, which is still subject to changes and needs approval from the government involved, is part of European Union efforts to reduce fossil fuel imports from Russia following the war in Ukraine. For this reason, I asked about the pipeline of EastMed. That if we had, if we couldn't delay, if we had a regional cooperation and we had made more discoveries, maybe this would be now available. For this reason, I asked you.
Yes. Okay. So I understand that direction, that angle. So I would say, first of all, the fact that there's a possibility for LNG to be exported from the Egyptian LNG terminals to Europe doesn't preclude other sources of gas from the Eastern Mediterranean arriving into Europe. And as a matter of fact, Egypt already does export volumes of LNG to European gas buyers. So it's not as if this is starting from ground zero. Again, whether there's likely to be space for a pipeline, depending on how much LNG capacity is agreed to be sent to Europe, and there is space for both. And you're absolutely right. If there were larger volumes of gas discovered in the Eastern Med, additional to what has already been discovered, then of course it will be easier to find people willing to fill up an East Med gas pipeline to Europe as well. But kind of things have to develop hand in hand. We have to keep options like the East Med pipeline on the table for future discoveries. But on the other hand, it can't be the only solution that we're looking at. There needs to be options.
At the end of this session, and now I want to ask Mr. Dr. Yannis Basias, last but not least. Dr. Basias has 35 years experience in the energy business, and especially in oil and gas in Indian Ocean, Equatorial American, West and North Africa. From 2016 up to 2020, he was president and CEO of Hellenic Hydrocarbon Resources and Management. Then, since 2000, was works in LNG midstream and assist also municipals in West Macedonia in the sustainable energy transition. Yanni, Dr. Basias, I want to ask you, in the recent study of ENA Outlook, 2019-2020, 21, you wrote the ENA Chapter 8 in order to, in other words, the chapter dealing with the upstream comprising 15 countries in the Adriatic, Southeast Mediterranean and the Eastern Balkan, and the Black Sea. What do you think? Are there any significant changes that have occurred in the last 20 months in the area of ENP for these 15 countries?
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. Thanks, Kostis. Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, there is no change, in fact. I mean, the only difference is Greece. In every of these 15 countries, that starts from Croatia, I mean, the Adriatic Sea goes down to Greece, then you have Libya, but, well, it is quiet, but producing. You have Egypt, and you go the other side, Palestine, Israel, and then Greece is in the middle, and the Black Sea. In every country there is oil and gas activity. Only Greece, everything has been blocked, and the problem is that Greece, as a small country, and as dependent, I would say, completely to the European funds. They followed the bonanza of the renewables that are only solar and wind. And so we abandoned whatever was related to the private investment and taking of risk, because when you have the subsidies from the European Union, believe me, there is no risk. Only maybe 10 or 20 years later on, you will have to pay back some of these loans that are not loans at the time when they're given. So I think this is the point. And if you allow also a few slides that will present a different view. A lot of us, they have maybe the same opinion. Let's start with the first one. So there is a lot of history, but the difference between the image to the left and the image to the right, it is 3,500 years. But it shows that in this area, and especially what is going on around Greece, it was always trading with some production. Those old times, the minimum times, it is copper, it was clothes, it was olive oil. Now it is gas. And also you can see that the center is passed after these 3,500 years, passed from Crete. Now we have a center which is the southeast Mediterranean, southeast. Then you have what is going on between Turkey and Greece, close to the Dardanelles. And then the strait, and then you have some new activity that becomes more and more important on the western part of the Black Sea. I'm talking about Romania, Bulgaria. And don't forget that the problems with the war in Ukraine, it is just very, very close. So whatever we have to the right image, it is gas. It is a fever of facilities constructed or under construction, which is something global, but especially in the area. Why? Because there will be a lot of transit. It is not the needs of Greece, that it is only 5.5 BCM. per year. It is not even Turkey, which is 50 to 55 BCM. It is that the entire Europe needs a lot, and as the plan is to avoid to be have gas coming from the north, it is there are plans to bring a lot of gas from other areas, but the other areas it is only Egypt and it is only Israel for now, and so it is not sufficient for Europe. It is not sufficient for the countries also, because don't forget that Egypt has a demographic explosion, and they need a lot of energy, because 3% of people below 18 years old every year, it is something that enters in the market, and so they need energy. So from time to time, and they export, but they import also, which is unbelievable, but this is the situation. So I'll go very fast. What is happening with gas is that, unfortunately, the last 10 years especially, we calculate the price of gas in megawatt hours, which is not very good, because it is like if you buy or you pay that on something that will become a product after you burn gas, while you should buy that in volume, in mass, in joule, which is thermal. And that created a lot of problems, and this is one of the reasons that brought this explosion of the price. And the other reason is that we don't have any innovative renewable energy sources today. I mean, with sun or with wind, you don't have the 24 hours, and you don't have the right flow of the wind as you like it. You know, the wind, the flow of the wind is, I mean, the electricity that is produced from the flow of the wind, it is a function of cube. I mean, if it flows 1, you put the cube of 1, it is 1. If it flows 2, it makes 8. And if it flows 3, it makes 27. But probably 27 is not good. You have to stop it. And 1, it is not good because it doesn't produce a lot of electricity. And then for the 24 hours of the solar panels, there is no need to say anything. So we have this kind of problems that in countries, they have been trapped only with this project, Stop Lignite, invest only on the technology that comes from other countries on solar and wind, created this problem of dependence, because we have something else that it is magic. And I think there are people here from the electricity sector, they know what is the 50 hertz, the magic 50 hertz, which is the alternative.
Sure.
Okay, it is not the direct. So you don't have to disturb, you have to keep that at 50 hertz. So if the grid does not have the electrical energy that you need so that you keep this 50 hertz, you know what you're doing? You burn gas. And here, in Greece especially, and some other countries, in the last years, anytime there was not a solar panel, but anytime there was a wind farm, you know what's going on? People, they import gas, they were very happy, because anytime you set up a wind, you will have to import gas to burn to keep the grid in this equilibrium of 50 hertz. And so this situation, it is quite general in the European Union, because it was a bureaucratic approach they had, not a technical approach, not a scientific approach, and all the big problems will appear somewhere between 2030 and 2035, where you have the crossing of all of these hypothetical lines for gas, for oil, for alternative energies. This is a BP diagram. So another problem, and some truths that we have to talk about, is that renewables. I mean, wind and the sun. We use that since the time that the humankind was more or less not arrived but evolved. Oil and gas, coal, but especially oil and gas, is what helped the society to evolve. And so the GDP increased by hundreds of times because we started using this material that creates a lot of thermal energy that you can transform on something else. So we don't have to insist on something that it is not real. Renewables, it is not new, it is old. Oil and gas, it is much younger. And now I hope that we will go to some other sources of energy that will be more and more interesting and will provide more and more energy. And that relates to demographics also. So the problem is that as the population of Earth increases, but the diameter of Earth or perimeter does not increase, we will have a problem of using a lot of our natural resources, and this is why it becomes important to find real, renewable, new technologies they can work, because with this we even pollute. And this is why there is a construction fever now, and as you know, well, Europe pays, Russia makes a lot of money, I think it was said several times before, and also because of the price that went up, and also all these countries, they import gas to Europe, they make money. So who's make money? Everybody. Who's not making? Europe. So this is the reality. And this is the big difficulty that have Brussels today, because they need to find how they can avoid situations that can become worse and worse. I would like to talk to you, it is only 5 minutes more, give me, about the saga of CO2. And Mr. Grigoriou, Dr. Grigoriou talked about the climate change, the anthropogenic climate change, but there is a real saga because, you know, the last 10 years, and I'll tell you something provocative even then, that it is true, but in the last 10 years, or especially from 2015, we had a slight decrease on CO2. But that was not because political decisions were done and so everybody corrected its actions and industrial work, etc. It was, if you take that chronologically, I mean, as a time scale, there was a lack of funding for new hydrocarbon exploration 14 to 15. Do you remember what was 14? The barrel was 110 and went down to 23. And it was a time where everybody was putting money. So, I mean, investing. So they found big difficulties. They stopped everything. So there was not a lot of market and there was a lot of consumption. And evidently, you don't emit a lot of CO2. Then, 16 and 17, you have OPEC. They decided to control the market. And that was a big problem for US at this time. So as they control the production, you will have a production that is controlled. So you don't have a lot of emissions, or you could have if everything was business-oriented, I say. Okay. And then there is something else. 18 to 19, you have the price that went up immediately, and so it was not easy during that time to invest, and so win the time that you lost because you were waiting. And the same situation we had with COVID, because everything stopped, and then if you don't invest for 2 years, then it will take time so that you can start working the machine again. So if you take all of this, and there are several steps, it helped to reduce the CO2. Now something, believe me, it is true. It is not to be someone who's working for the shale gas, but US, they helped, I mean, they contributed to the decrease of CO2 they used to produce. You know why? Because they used to use a lot of coal before. And when they started using a lot of shale gas, because coal, it is more pollutant than shale gas, even if it is shale gas, well, in summary, there was a decrease in the emission of CO2 they were doing in the US, and this is true. But nobody's saying that. Nobody wants to say that, but it is true. So you have to accept this kind of facts. Mm-hmm. And now, gas reserves. Please go down. Southeast Mediterranean, 1%. this is what are the reserves of what we talked before and what Nicodemus talked and what George was talking about and everybody. So this is the situation. You see who is first, who is second, who is third? And then shale gas. Look what is going on. It is 1,115 TCF. And
Yes.
Europe has shale gas.
Following that, I want to ask you something about LNG and shale gas. In your opinion, what will be the evolution of LNG in the next decade, in the future? And what is the role will play the shale gas? Do you think that it will be enough to cover the energy needs in the future?
Well, the shale gas, as far as it is developed today, a lot, mostly by US, that has 2/3 or 3/4 of its reserves, it is shale gas, and only 1/4 it is natural gas in US. So they put a lot of effort there. This is why they built a lot of liquefaction plants, new plants in East Coast and also the Gulf of Mexico. There are 4 or 5 new that will appear after 2027. So they consider that they will be able, at the end of this decade, to send to the outside world 165 BCM, not for Europe, for everywhere. So I think it is a business for US for 10 years, maybe 12 years. This is something like that. And at the same time, we have some other evolution that some other evolution. I'll show in the next slide what is going on with the synthetic fuels that are the counterpart of shale oil now. But just a few words about Greece, because we are in Greece. So as we said, the new installations of facilities of LNG coming and becoming gas again, these facilities in 5 years will be able to transit 21 BCM, while Greece needs 6 BCM. So what will happen with the other 15 BCM?
Yeah.
It will be transit to somewhere else. And the point is, shall we make as countries some money because of this transit service? Is there any legislation covering and guarantee that? I don't think that there is something yet. Probably something is prepared.
Okay. So.
A time, yeah, I know. So
Thank you very much,
Let's stop here.
Dr. Basias. I agree absolutely with you with your analysis. I think that we have not more time. I don't know if someone of you want to make a question, but very, very short question. If because we don't have time, we have only 2 minutes.
I'll make a quick statement. Thank you. I think this was very brilliant. And I think it'd be great to perhaps have additional discussion, which is very open and transparent, and invite the political leaders of the countries to come and listen. Because the stuff we've mentioned, the key points we mentioned, are opportunities for the political leaders of Southeast Europe to deliver less energy poverty, energy security, as well as hydrocarbons while we're going towards the energy transition, which all of you mentioned will take decades. It's a time and a period for Southeastern European leaders to lead. And that's the key message I want them to take home.
Thank you very much for all your panelists, for your kind remarks. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye, George.